with fairness, but we've got to enforce the law.
Mr. Vice President!
Speaking about local government, there was a clash in St. Cloud roughly a week ago, and their mayor said they haven't heard about ICE being in the city. And how does ICE kind of proactively work with these local agencies? What are those policies, and what's your response to that allegation?
You said there was an altercation in St. Cloud. Yeah.
After the incident, the mayor said that ICE did not communicate with them that they were in the city for a major operation. The police chief did not know about the operation at the time. Could you talk a little bit about proactive communication with local law enforcement?
Yeah, it's one of the takeaways. I've talked with these guys before we came on the stage, but during our roundtable and some of the other conversations we've had, communication, we absolutely want to ensure there's good communication between federal officials and state and local officials, and I'm sure that we can do better on that. We absolutely want to make sure that we are communicating, but that also requires a two-way street, and that's the point that I make about state and local officials. These guys will absolutely communicate with state and local officials. They'll tell people if they have to do an enforcement operation in a particular municipality, but part of that is they also want to ensure that if they're communicating about their whereabouts, that's not being used as a weapon against them. Sometimes they tell people where they're going, and then they find out that their agents' faces are on on Reddit or on some social media thread saying, here's this guy, we know he's going to be at this place at this exact time. So that communication has got to be a two-way street. These guys are going to communicate with business leaders, with local officials, with state officials, but we also need the local officials and state officials to do a good job of protecting people when they're in their communities. We're not asking, by the way, we don't want any police officer in this community, in this state, to help us do immigration enforcement. We've got that. But if a protester shows up and that protester turns violent against our immigration officers, we really, really need the cooperation of our local partners. We haven't gotten it yet, but I think if we do, we really can lower the temperature.
Yeah. Earlier this week, The Washington Post reported today that an ICE memo allows agents to enter people's houses without a judge's warrant. What do you say to people who are concerned about this violating the Constitution, and how much is this tactic being used?
Yeah, so I saw that story, and the story is like so much that I read in the mainstream media. It's missing a whole lot of context, and when you appreciate the context, it makes sense. No one is saying, look, there are exceptions. For example, a crazy exception, if somebody is fired at from inside a house, they don't need a warrant to go inside that person's house. There are very narrow exceptions to the warrant requirement where law enforcement officers don't need a warrant if, for example, they're an imminent threat of their lives. But what we've said and what ICE has proposed, what the Department of Homeland Security really has proposed in the Department of Justice, is that we can get administrative warrants to enforce administrative immigration law. Now, it's possible, I guess, that the courts will say no, and of course, if the courts say no, we would follow that law, but nobody is talking about doing immigration enforcement without a warrant. We're talking about different types of warrants that exist in our system. Typically what happens, not always, but typically in the immigration system, those are handled by administrative law judges. So we're talking about getting warrants from those administrative law judges, and then of course, with other cases, you get judges, or you get warrants from a judge. That's very consistent with the practice of American law. I'm sure the courts will weigh in on that, but we're never going to enter somebody's house without some kind of a warrant, unless, of course, somebody's firing on an officer or they have to do something in order to protect themselves.
Follow up on that. Do you believe that you can forcibly enter with an administrative warrant, or would that be a violation of the Fourth Amendment?
Well, our understanding is that you can enforce the immigration laws of the country under an administrative order if you have an administrative warrant. That's what we think. That's our understanding of the law. That's our best faith attempt to understand the law. Again, this is something courts will weigh in on. I won't speak to that. But yes, most immigration law in our country is not done through the criminal system with the judge. It's done through the administrative law system. We're going to continue that practice just as they did in the Biden administration or any other administration.
Was there anything that you heard or saw today that would cause you to counsel the president to invoke the Insurrection Act? And then also, did you meet or talk to the ICE agent who was involved in the Renee Good incident?
I did not talk to him today. I talked to some of his colleagues. Your question on the Insurrection Act is interesting. I've tried to understand this as well as I possibly could, and my understanding is what the Insurrection Act, what invoking the Insurrection Act would allow the federal government to do, is that it would allow the federal government to use the military for local law enforcement operations. Right now, we don't think that we need that. Now, the president could change his mind. Of course, things could get worse. But right now, we think that federal law enforcement officers can do the job of federal law enforcement. Now, what I do worry about, again, is if the chaos gets worse, if more and more ICE agents start getting assaulted, if other law enforcement officers start getting assaulted, that would be a real problem. But again, we have so much federal law enforcement resources here right now. We have so many people here that we do not want to have here.